My neighbor actually called the police on my wife for doing yoga in our own backyard. I'm not exaggerating. Kimberly Harrison really dialed 911 because Mary was stretching on the deck early one morning. But here's the part that still makes my skin prickle. Instead of looking shocked or angry, Mary almost seemed a broken bar pleased when the police cars pulled up, like she'd been anticipating the moment. If you're hearing this story for the first time, you should know it didn't start with that call. Mary had been through hell on her last military deployment, and I could see it in her eyes that 1,000-yard stare combat veterans carry home. This was our first time living together as a married couple, and I was hoping that civilian life, along with the serenity of our beautiful lakefront home, would help her recover. That cabin meant everything to me, worth over $1 million. It was a family treasure I'd inherited from my grandfather. I thought the peace and quiet of Pine Lake would be exactly what Mary needed, but I couldn't have been more wrong about the peace and quiet part. Kimberly Harrison showed up before Mary even finished unpacking, as if she'd been watching from across the lake, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Her voice was like venom wrapped in satin. "Dylan," she called with an overly sweet tone that made my teeth ache. "What a lovely surprisey broken bar, and this must be your exotic new house guest." The way she said exotica like Mary was an unusual fruit instead of a persona made my jaw clench. Then came the next insult disguised as curiosity. She smiled and asked about Mary's beautiful caramel skin and that accent, wondering aloud where Mary was originally from. The truth? Mary was born and raised in Texas, but something in her posture told me to stay quiet and let the conversation play out. That's when things got strange. The confident, composed woman I'd married suddenly shrank into someone timid, almost deferential. "I'm so sorry if I seem different," Mary said softly. "I just want to learn how to fit in here. Could you teach me the right way to be part of this community?" Kimberly's eyes lit up as she patted Mary's shoulder like she was a stray in need of training. "Oh, honey, don't worry, we'll help you understand proper American suburban behavior." The emphasis she put on Americana as if Mary wasn't Americana was infuriating. Then came the sales pitch wrapped in tradition. Kimberly spoke about how lakefront properties required a certain type of resident, how the community had deeply rooted values that some people might find hard to adapt to, and then the real threat: of course, everyone's welcome near a broken bar as long as they blend in appropriately. I realized then that she'd been trying to buy this property for years, and now she saw Mary as her way in. What I didn't realize was that Mary was already playing her own game. Mary acted eager to please, promising to learn how to be good enough to live here. Kimberly lapped it up, assuring her that they'd help her adjust to our standards, slipping in the word civilized before quickly correcting herself. Every sentence was a carefully sharpened blade meant to make Mary feel small. By the time Kimberly left, she'd managed to turn welcome into the most unwelcoming word I'd ever heard. I was furious. That night, I confronted Mary. "What was that? You acted like you were scared of her." Mary met my eyes with that steady, calculating look I knew so well. "That woman wants our house." I could see it in her face. "Then let's just tell her no," I said. Mary shook her head. "Sometimes the direct approach isn't the best one. Trust me, just follow my lead for a few days." I went to bed wondering what exactly I'd married into. Why would a decorated military officer suddenly appear so helpless? The truth was, Mary wasn't breaking down as she was setting the stage. And soon, I'd see exactly what kind of game she was playing. Kimberly kept showing up, armed with a smile and a new suggestion each day, each one designed to chip away at Mary's confidence. The flowers Mary planted were too festive, her clothes too bold, her music too spirited. Kimberly always suggested something more appropriate or more traditional, each remark sugar-coated but laced with insult, and then she shifted to financial pressure. That's when her real plan began to show. The list Kimberly handed us looked like something from a home renovation nightmare, except it came with a threat. $15,000 for appropriate American landscaping, $8,000 for a refined, community standard mailbox, $12,000 more for driveway upgrades to meet the neighborhood's so-called aesthetic. And all of it had to be completed in 30 days or we'd face daily fines so steep they could bankrupt us in months. "I'm only trying to help you fit in," Kimberly would say with that syrupy smile that hid a razor's edge. "We want you to succeed here." And Maria Brokenbar actually thanked her. Every time, each thank you seemed to fuel Kimberly's twisted sense of control. The way she manipulated the neighborhood was the most insidious part. She'd whisper to others about Mary, wrapping her poison in false compassion. "That poor girl Brokenbar, so different from our way of life." She'd shake her head like she pitied us, adding that military PTSD is such a tragedy, especially when cultural differences make it harder to adjust. Then she'd suggest, ever so gently, that maybe Mary would be more comfortable with people from her own background. Within days, neighbors who once greeted us warmly were crossing the street to avoid us. Mary was treated like some delicate, damaged bird that might bite if approached. But the more I watched her, the more cracks I noticed in the helpless act. Her anxiety attacks seemed to appear only when Kimberly was present. With everyone else, the mailman, other residents, shop owners and Tony, Mary was composed and confident. And then there were the skills. The way she discreetly set up recording devices when she thought I wasn't looking. The precise legal language she suddenly seemed to know. The perfectly timed questions she'd ask that made people overshare. I started digging on my own. What I found made me physically ill. Kimberly had done this before. The exact same tactics. In just the last 2 years, 3 military families had suddenly decided to leave Pine Lake, selling their properties for 40 to 50% below market value. Each case came with the same pattern of mysterious complaints, code violations, community standard citations, and whispers about whether those families really belonged in a refined neighborhood. Every single sale had earned Kimberly a commission. Records showed she had agreements with developers eager to buy up lakefront property for commercial projects. She targeted military families because she knew they moved often and were already under strain from deployments or PTSD. Vulnerability was her opening. She'd isolate them, crush them with bogus fines, and then sweep an offering to help them sell quickly. It was calculated, ruthless, and it worked every time until she chose Mary. By the end of the second week, Kimberly arrived at our door with a performance worthy of an Oscar. She told Mary that sometimes families find it less stressful to relocate than to struggle with community expectations. Mary's reply was pure theater. She let her voice break, her eyes fill with tears, and asked if Kimberly was suggesting we might have to leave my family's home. "Well," Kimberly said, her tone dripping with false concern, "sometimes circumstances help people realize where they truly belong." I swear I saw satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. I was ready to throw her in the lake right then, but Mary caught my gaze and gave the faintest shake of her head. She was still running her play, and she didn't want me to interfere. That night, I snapped. "Mary, this has gone too far," I said, probably louder than I should have. "You're not yourself anymore." Tears, a real lore nota welled in her eyes. "I'm just trying to fit in, Dylan. Maybe I'm not good enough for this place." That was it. I started pacing the bedroom like a caged animal. "Tomorrow, I'm telling Kimberly to back off." Mary's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "No, Dylan, you don't understand. She could destroy us." "Destroy us? How?" I demanded. She looked at me in a way I couldn't read. "What aren't you telling me?" Her question hit me like a punch. I wasn't hiding anything, but suddenly, I realized my wife was. I went to bed with my mind spinning. Either Mary was breaking down from her deployment trauma, or she was orchestrating the most intricate psychological counterattack I'd ever seen. I didn't know which possibility scared me more, her losing control, or her being entirely in control of something I couldn't comprehend. Week 3 was when Kimberly decided to escalate from passive-aggressive sabotage to involving the police. And that's when I started to see glimpses of who my wife really was. The third week was when Kimberly shifted from neighborhood gossip and petty complaints to something far more serious, dragging the police into it. The first call came on a Tuesday morning while I was in my workshop. The wail of sirens made my stomach drop, and when I ran outside, I found 2 patrol cars in our driveway. Kimberly was there, speaking to the officers as though she'd uncovered a national security threat. "Officer," she began in that sugar-coated voice that always meant trouble, "I'm worried about some unusual activity, broken bar, things that seem culturally unfamiliar for our community." She went on to describe Mary's morning yoga as suspicious ethnic behavior that made neighbors uncomfortable. Yes, yoga. On our own deck, she actually suggested to the police that Mary was engaging in foreign ritualistic practices because of her background. Officer Thompson, thankfully a man with common sense, he looked about as thrilled to be there as I felt. "Ma'am," he said, with the kind of patience reserved for the willfully unreasonable, "she's stretching on her deck." "What's suspicious about that?" Kimberly wouldn't let it go. "I'm sure it's perfectly normal where she's from," she insisted, "but here, it's a broken bar, unsettling. Foreign displays," she called it. Over downward dog. Mary emerged during this ridiculous scene, trembling and hiding behind me like she was genuinely afraid. In a quiet, wavering voice, she asked the officer if she was in trouble for exercising. One glance at her, then at Kimberly's self-satisfied smirk, and I could see Thompson putting the pieces together. He warned Kimberly that making false reports about lawful activities could lead to charges. She brushed it off, claiming she only wanted to preserve community harmony. 3 days later, she was back at it. This time, she reported a disturbing domestic situation involving loud, foreign-sounding arguments. The truth? Mary and I had been sitting on the porch debating whether to grill chicken or fish, when Thompson arrived again. The irritation in his voice was obvious. "Ma'am," he told Kimberly, "this is harassment. You need to stop calling about perfectly normal behavior." Kimberly feigned innocence, claiming she was worried about Mary's safety because cultural disputes can be unpredictable. Cultural disputes over dinner plans. That's when I began watching Mary more closely. Every police visit was followed by what looked like a meltdown. Mary pacing, wringing her hands, wondering aloud if we should move. But while she appeared shaken, she was also asking pointed questions. The legal definition of harassment, the consequences of false police reports, the process for collecting evidence in domestic cases. For someone supposedly traumatized by police attention, she had a sharp interest in procedure. I dug deeper into Kimberly's past. What I found was worse than I imagined. She'd used the same tactics on previous military families. Dozens of police calls over noise, suspicious activity, even anonymous drug tips. The goal was always the same: push the family to a breaking point, then swoop in with a lowball buyer lined up. But Mary wasn't following the script of Kimberly's usual victims. She wasn't reacting impulsively or trying to fight back in anger. She was gathering information meticulously. I noticed the detailed log she kept, the legal documents spread across our kitchen table, the discreet placement of recording devices. When I asked, she brushed it off as self-protection, but the precision felt a broken bar professional. The third police call was the turning point for me. Kimberly claimed Mary had damaged community property, and even roped in a couple of loyal supporters to back her up. This time, Thompson's patience was gone. "Mrs. Harrison," he said flatly, "this is your 4th false report in 2 weeks. I'm documenting a harassment pattern that could lead to charges." Mary's response was a masterclass in performance. She clung to me, looking on the verge of collapse, asking in a trembling voice if we were going to be arrested. But as I held her, I saw her make deliberate eye contact with Thompson, communicating something without a single word. After the patrol cars left, I confronted her. "These panic attacks only happen when Kimberly's around. With everyone else, you're steady. What's really going on?" Mary studied me for a long moment, like she was weighing her next move. "Dylan," she said slowly, "you're right. None of this is random." It hit me like a flash. "You're not falling apart," I said. "You're playing her." Mary gave a small nod, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the confident woman I'd married. Mary leaned in and said quietly, "I just need you to trust me a little longer." Then she added that Kimberly had to call the federal authorities. I stared at her as if she'd just claimed to be from another planet. "You want her to call the feds?" My voice jumped higher than I intended. Mary's expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen, calm, calculating, and radiating absolute confidence. It was as though she had been wearing a mask for weeks and was finally letting me see what was underneath. "Dylan, that woman has been running a systematic property acquisition scheme aimed at military families for years," Mary explained. "She's broken multiple federal laws in the process, but I needed her to feel secure enough to make the kind of mistake that would take down her whole operation." That night, I went to bed with my mind racing. It hit me that Mary wasn't the prey in this story, as she was the predator. And Kimberly Harrison had no idea she was being hunted by someone far more dangerous than a pushy HOA president. Still, I couldn't shake the question. Why would Mary want federal agents involved? What exactly was she hiding from her own husband? It didn't take long for Kimberly to do exactly what Mary had predicted. She filed federal complaints, confident she was finally going to expose the fraud in our community. What Kimberly didn't realize was that she just triggered an investigation that would unravel everything she had spent 6 years building. The official notification came as a call from Agent Williams of the Military Criminal Investigation Command. He wanted to arrange interviews about serious allegations of military benefits fraud and stolen valor against Mary. I stood there watching her take the call, and what amazed me wasn't that she was calm, it was how prepared she seemed. "Of course, Agent Williams," she said evenly. "I understand you have a job to do. I'll have all relevant documentation ready for you." When she hung up, I asked why she wasn't panicked. She gave me a look that mixed determination with amusement. "Because I have nothing to hide about us, Dylan. Everything else is about to become very clear." Kimberly, on the other hand, was practically giddy. She called Mary immediately, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Federal agents are coming for you. I finally exposed what you really are." Mary's reaction could have won her an acting award. She pleaded with Kimberly not to go forward, feign panic about the investigation, and even offered to confess to whatever Kimberly wanted. At first, I thought she had lost her Minda until I realized she was recording Kimberly's words as part of her trap. The following weeks turned the community into a pressure cooker. Kimberly waged a media campaign, alerting local news outlets about the investigation and painting herself as the concerned citizen who had saved Pine Lake from dangerous criminals. Many neighbors believed her, but cracks were starting to form. Officer Thompson had been keeping track of her false reports, and whispers began to circulate. How could one person have so many problems with just one family? Behind the scenes, Mary was anything but idle. She was quietly compiling a meticulous legal case against Kimberly's entire scheme, interviewing other military families who had been pushed out of similar lakefront neighborhoods, collecting years' worth of harassment records, and tracing the financial web behind it all. When I asked where she had learned to handle all this legal work, she said it came from her military service and knowledge of family rights. It sounded believable, but the precision of her work felt a broken bar professional. Then Agent Williams called me in for a private meeting. He asked if I was aware of the accusations against Mary. I told him exactly what I thought. "I know my wife. If she's done anything, she had damn good reasons." My answer surprised him. Apparently most spouses aren't so quick to defend someone under federal investigation. But what really caught my attention was that he seemed far more interested in Kimberly than Mary. He wanted details about the harassment, the false police reports, and the financial pressure. It was becoming clear Mary might not be the suspect at all. She was the key witness. I finally asked Mary what was really going on. For the first time in weeks, her voice softened back into the familiar tone I knew. "That woman scares me more than you realize," she admitted. When I pointed out she'd been acting like a completely different person, she gave me a look that carried a hint of guilt. "Just trust me for a few more days," she said. "After this is over, no more secrets." Something about the way she said it convinced me her game was nearing its end. Kimberly, still riding her wave of arrogance, kept feeding the media stories about Mary's supposed crime and never realizing she was actually digging her own grave. Kimberly's arrogance had reached the point where she practically built the case against herself. Every public statement she made became evidence of defamation, and she even began leaning on other neighbors to back her accusations in writing. She was so sure of her victory that she documented her own harassment campaign in real time. The stage for the final showdown was set when Agent Williams called to arrange formal interviews with everyone present. Kimberly quickly suggested holding it at the community center. She wanted the entire neighborhood to witness Mary's supposed humiliation and arrest. When I told Mary the location, she simply smiled, a look I hadn't seen in weeks. "Perfect," she said. "Public venue, plenty of witnesses, federal agents, local police. It all needs to be properly documented." When I asked what she meant, she replied with an almost knowing calm, "You'll understand soon." Dylan, are you ready to find out who you really married? The night before, Mary sat me down for what felt like the most important conversation of our marriage. Tomorrow, you'll know everything, she told me, but I need you to believe that everything between us our marriage, my love for you, the life we've built is completely real. I felt a lump in my throat, terrified of losing her to whatever charges might be looming. She looked at me, her voice quiet. After tomorrow, you might not want to stay married to me. I took her hands, staring into the eyes that first made me fall in love. Try me, I said. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That evening, Mary moved with military precision, organizing what looked like an exhaustive briefing package. Every recording was time-stamped, every photo labeled, every legal document cross-referenced. Mary, I asked, watching her work, how do you even know how to do all this? She met my eyes with a confidence I'd never seen before. You'll find out tomorrow. But Dylan, she has no idea what she's walked into. I couldn't help but wonder when Mary finally had to show her real military ID. Would 6 weeks of meticulous planning pay off, or was Kimberly about to unearth the biggest lie imaginable? By this point, Agent Williams' background check on Mary was far from routine. It was a deep dive into her entire military record, deployment history, and service medals. The government doesn't commit those kinds of resources unless something serious is in play, and I was starting to worry about what it meant for her. But Mary wasn't acting like someone bracing for fraud charges. She was acting like a soldier prepping for an operation. Every morning, she reviewed her evidence with the sort of focus I'd only seen in movies about Pentagon briefings. Complete files on Kimberly's harassment, detailed timelines, legal references, and recordings of every incident. She claimed her military training taught her to document potential threats, and while it sounded reasonable, the level of professionalism suggested she'd done this before. Meanwhile, Kimberly's smear campaign had swayed many of our neighbors, painting herself as the community's protector. But cracks were showing. Some residents started questioning why one family could have so many problems requiring police attention. Officer Thompson began quietly tracking her false reports, even warning others about filing complaints that couldn't be backed up. Mary's performance was remarkably still playing the part of a shaken victim with Kimberly, yet when she thought no one was watching, her demeanor shifted completely. I'd catch her making calls using military jargon, arranging files with meticulous care, and asking complex legal questions well beyond the reach of standard training. When I confronted her about the inconsistencies, she brushed it off as protecting us both. Then came my follow-up interview with Agent Williams. Instead of pressing about Mary's supposed fraud, he started asking for specifics on Kimberly's tactics of false reports, financial pressure, and systematic isolation of military families. Mr. Cooper, he said, your wife has provided some very compelling documentation about harassment patterns targeting military personnel in lakefront communities. We're investigating whether this is part of a larger civil rights issue. I left that meeting stunned. Maybe Mary wasn't the one under investigation. After all, maybe she was the witness. Kimberly, oblivious to the trap she'd built for herself, doubled down at calling reporters, giving detailed interviews, and rallying neighbors to support her claims. Every word she uttered was another piece of evidence against her, but she was too convinced of her moral high ground to see it. Mary's campaign against Kimberly had reached a breaking point. Kimberly's rhetoric had become so blatantly laced with racist undertones that even some of her own supporters were starting to squirm. The turning point for me came by accident. I overheard Mary on the phone with what sounded like a military legal officer, discussing systematic targeting of military families and coordinated harassment campaigns designed to pressure them into selling their homes. The conversation was full of procedural jargon and legal terms no ordinary military spouse would know. When she noticed me listening, she quickly ended the call. I asked, Mary, what kind of military job did you actually have? She met my eyes with a mix of guilt and relief before answering carefully. The kind where I learned to recognize patterns of domestic threats to military personnel. And Dylan, Kimberly Harrison isn't just a neighborhood bully. She's been running a sophisticated property acquisition scheme targeting dozens of military families across multiple states. Over the next few days, Mary revealed more. Kimberly had ties to real estate investment groups that specialized in snapping up lakefront homes below market value. The harassment wasn't random, it was a calculated strategy to force military families into distressed sales. The precision of her targeting, the specific demographic focus, and the way she coordinated with local officials to create legal pressure all pointed to a much larger, more organized operation. "How do you even know all this?" I asked. Mary gave me that look again, weighing how much to tell me. Because identifying and documenting these kinds of threat patterns is exactly what I was trained to do in the military. And because Kimberly made the mistake of going after someone who knows how these operations work, it dawned on me that my wife wasn't simply documenting harassment for legal purposes. She'd been running what amounted to a counterintelligence operation against a predator who'd been preying on military families for years. When the showdown finally came, it was almost anticlimactic compared to the weeks of build-up. Agent Williams scheduled formal interviews with all parties present, and Kimberly immediately suggested the community center. She wanted a public spectacle, expecting to see Mary humiliated and possibly arrested in front of the entire neighborhood. Mary agreed without hesitation, a decision that should have made Kimberly pause. "Perfect," Mary told me. "Public witnesses, federal agents, local police, and media coverage if she's arranged it. Everything will be documented." Her confidence made me realize I was about to see a side of my wife I'd never truly known. The community center was packed with neighbors, reporters, local law enforcement, and the curious. Kimberly strutted to the front, projecting the smug authority of someone convinced she was moments away from victory. She gave a speech dripping with condescension about protecting our community standards and keeping out those who masquerade as something they're not. The coded bigotry wasn't even subtle anymore. Mary played her part flawlessly, nervous but dignified, leaning on me for support, keeping up the fight till the Section 8 of the fragile victim. But in her eyes, I saw something else. The sharp focus of someone who had been here before and knew exactly how this would end. When Agent Williams called for official identity verification, Mary nodded with quiet acceptance. "Of course, Agent Williams. I understand you have to do your job." That's when Kimberly made the mistake that would seal her fate. As Mary reached for her ID, Kimberly turned to the crowd, brimming with certainty. "Watch closely, everyone. She'll either produce fake papers or admit she's been lying all along. Real American military families have proper breeding." Mary's hands appeared to tremble as she pulled out her wallet. She held up the card, and Officer Thompson stepped forward to read it aloud for the record. The room fell silent. Kimberly leaned in eagerly, ready to bask in her victory. But the moment she saw the card, her face froze. The ID was genuinely Lieutenant Colonel Mary Vasquez Cooper, U.S. Air Force IA in official government format. In an instant, Kimberly's expression shifted from smug triumph to wide-eyed disbelief. Her jaw dropped, but no words came out. She froze mid-gesture, as if someone had hit the pause button on her entire life. Every bit of color drained from her face, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse right there. Officer Thompson began reading aloud for all to hear. "Lieutenant Colonel Mary Vasquez Cooper, United States Air Force, currently assigned to Peterson Air Force Base, holder of a top-secret security clearance." The collective gasp from the crowd was unmistakable. Kimberly's loyal supporters instantly began to edge away from her, as though she'd suddenly become radioactive. She remained locked in place, struggling to process the fact that she had spent 6 weeks relentlessly harassing a high-ranking military officer who could have ended her life with a single phone call. But Mary wasn't finished. In the span of seconds, I watched my wife transform like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. If the butterfly happened to be a decorated officer radiating the authority of someone accustomed to commanding soldiers, her stance straightened, her tone turned crisp, and every trace of the helpless victim act vanished. "Agent Williams," she said calmly but with unmistakable authority, "I have comprehensive documentation of Mrs. Harrison's systematic harassment of military families in this community." From her bag, she produced a meticulously organized file, months of recordings, photographs, witness statements, and legal records, each piece arranged with military precision. Together, they painted a damning picture of years-long civil rights violations. The federal consequences for Kimberly were swift and devastating. Agent Williams announced charges for multiple federal crimes, false reporting to federal authorities, harassment of military personnel, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, and civil rights violations. Investigators had also uncovered evidence of a larger network targeting military families across several states, tied to real estate investment schemes profiting from forced distressed sales. Kimberly wasn't just in trouble, she was at the center of a sophisticated property theft ring disguised as community standards enforcement. Mary then turned to Kimberly, her voice like cold steel. "Mrs. Harrison, my assignment required operational security for obvious reasons. However, your harassment mirrored tactics used by hostile foreign agents to compromise military personnel. You crossed multiple federal boundaries, and I fully recommend prosecution to deter any future attacks on our military families." This wasn't my wife speaking as I'd known her. This was Lieutenant Colonel Mary Vasquez Cooper, and she was formidable enough to send a chill down my spine. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Neighbors who had once stood by Kimberly now recoiled, horrified that they had been complicit in targeting a decorated officer. The military families present instantly recognized what Mary had endured and respected the strategy she'd used to expose a serious threat to their community. Kimberly's reputation collapsed in real time, and by the moment she was led away in handcuffs, she had become utterly isolated. Her last desperate cry was, "This isn't fair, she tricked me, she was pretending to be weak." Mary's reply sealed her fate. "Mrs. Harrison, I gave you every opportunity to stop. You escalated because you mistook my kindness for weakness. That mistake has now cost you everything." I looked at Mary with new eyes, realizing I had married someone far more capably and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. She had executed a flawless psychological operation right under everyone's noses, and I couldn't help but wonder, broken bar, what other secrets had this lieutenant colonel kept even from her husband? Weeks later, at a backyard barbecue, Mary was the celebrated hero of the Pine Lake community. I still found it hard to believe that the woman I'd thought I was protecting had, in truth, been protecting all of us from a ruthless predator who had operated unchecked for years. The fallout was swift. Kimberly received 5 years in federal prison for harassment, plus 3 more for her role in the financial conspiracy. The investigation revealed her operation had targeted more than 30 military families across 4 states. Kimberly's downfall was complete. Her scheme of forcing property sales had earned her partners over $12 million in underpriced acquisitions, but now she had lost it all: her home, her business, her freedom, and her reputation. The court ordered her to pay over $400,000 in restitution to the families she had targeted. The irony couldn't have been sharper. She was stripped of the very thing she had tried to take from us and dozens of other households. What stunned me even more was learning the full truth about my wife. Mary wasn't just an Air Force officer, she was Lieutenant Colonel Mary Vasquez Cooper, a specialist in psychological operations. Her career had been devoted to designing strategies to protect military families from domestic threats. The desk job I'd always pictured as mundane administrative work was, in reality, a classified position focused on identifying and countering harassment tactics used against military personnel and their loved ones. Mary had recognized Kimberly's operation from day one. It was a textbook example of the threats she'd been trained to neutralize. When I asked her why she hadn't told me from the beginning, she explained that in her line of work, even spouses weren't always privy to every detail. More importantly, revealing her authority too soon would have only driven Kimberly toward a different target. By allowing Kimberly to believe she was an easy mark, Mary had gathered the evidence needed to shut the entire operation down, safeguarding every military family in the region. She told me she hated keeping secrets from me, but now, there would be none. What followed was a transformation of our community. Pine Lake went from a place where military families were marginalized to one of the most military-friendly neighborhoods in the county. Word spread quickly, and soon there was a waiting list of military families eager to move in. Property values rose, and the whole leadership now included several veterans and active-duty families dedicated to maintaining a genuinely welcoming environment. Mary's career soared as she was promoted to full colonel and assigned to the Pentagon to create national protocols for protecting military families from domestic harassment. Her case study on Kimberly's operation became required training for service members transitioning into civilian life, and she was invited to testify before Congress. I went from thinking I was married to someone with a low-profile government role to realizing my wife was a nationally recognized authority in her field. My own business flourished, too, once people knew I was married to the colonel who had dismantled a threat to military families. I received calls from military museums, veteran organizations, and families who trusted me with their furniture restoration projects. Government contracts secured my financial stability, and I began teaching woodworking therapy programs for veterans with PTSD. The work brought me a deeper sense of purpose than I'd ever known. The final twist of poetic justice came when Kimberly's foreclosed home was bought by a young Marine family for less than half of what she'd once tried to strong-arm us into selling ours for. The area where she once ran her surveillance operation is now a thriving community garden maintained by military spouses and their children, complete with a plaque honoring families who endured harassment for their service. Where her influence once bred fear, children now play freely, and neighbors, many of them active duty or retired service members, build the kind of community she had tried to destroy. Looking back, I realize I'd been watching a flawless execution of psychological operations designed not for foreign battlefields, but for a suburban neighborhood. Every calculated moment of vulnerability had been part of Mary's plan to lure Kimberly into committing crimes she could never walk away from. One evening, watching the sunset together, I asked Mary if we'd face any more neighborhood drama. She smiled and shook her head, saying Pine Lake now had a reputation as a place where military families were respected and protected. I couldn't help feeling immense pride for the woman beside me. That's what communities should be about, she said, squeezing my hand. But never forget us. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who mistake kindness for weakness. And sometimes, the person you think you know best turns out to be the hero you never knew you needed.